Welcome back to Dark Corners Streaming. I wasn't a He-Man super fan back in the day, but I never missed the cartoon and I had a bunch of the toys, still do in fact, at my parents' house. And documentary feature The Power of Grayskull, the definitive history of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, took me back to my childhood, which I think is the first thing a documentary like this, largely founded in nostalgia, should do.
You're transported into this world.
The second, of course, is to engage a disinterested audience with a compelling narrative.
What's the point? He says pass.
When toy company Mattel passed on the Star Wars contract, later picked up by Kenner, they did themselves out of the most lucrative deal in merchandising history. And they tried to make up for this mistake by making toys for the new Conan the Barbarian film.
Then along comes Conan. They said, hey, we got a movie.
Slight problem.
Then Mattel, to their horror, found that Conan was going to be an R-rated film.
But the prep work from that, plus an unsolicited idea from one of their designers, led to a new toy range, not tied to a pre-existing property.
And he called this one He-Man. And we said, He-Man.
The backstory of the toy, about which I knew nothing, is briskly delivered by the people who were there and far more fascinating than the origins of a toy has any right to be.
Why don't we do a massive figure?
From the empowering inspiration of He-Man's catchphrase.
And that's where we saw these little kids going, you do this because I tell you to do it. You know, exactly the words their mother was saying. So they wanted the power.
To the cut-price origins of Battle Cat.
This cat was part of the Big Jim line.
I had no idea that the first-of-its-kind cartoon, which turned He-Man from success to phenomenon, was only made possible by a legal change.
Before that, a toy company could not make a half-an-hour, well, essentially a TV commercial for their toy.
And again, it's the behind-the-scenes snippets.
Heroes always said this is always solid. Villains have spaces in the teeth. I don't know why.
That really makes a documentary like this.
They got a muscle guy, a woman, some other characters, and they dressed them up in costume and they shot the black and white footage of it for stock scenes, which there were like He-Man runs in. They were action scenes more than dialogue scenes.
It follows the story as He-Man's success spawns a spin-off.
She should present a feeling of strength, not a feeling of high-heeled, can't hardly move, slimness.
And is able to make some still relevant points along the way.
To the point where they said, if she's a female character, should not be fighting. A female character should not be using a sword.
And after the rise, inevitably comes the fall.
Stinkor was a merman painted black and white with a stripe down him, and he had a scent.
Characterized by the big screen live-action adaptation with Dolph Lundgren.
I think the schedule and the budget started collapsing towards the end of the shoot.
Although, it must be said, the documentary gives the Masters of the Universe feature a much easier ride than we did when we reviewed it for regular Dark Corners.
I'll be back.
At this point, for me, the story did become less interesting. That's partly because it ceased to have a nostalgic connection, but I think it's also because this does feel like a story in search of a satisfying third act. Although the He-Man those of my generation remember was gone, Mattel was unwilling to let go.
We went from He-Man as G.I. Joe, He-Man wrestler, He-Man playing baseball. What could He-Man be doing?
So the reboots kept coming. The documentary doesn't really have a point of view on this wilderness era, it's just relating what happened, and the relentless optimism of the talking heads can seem misguided. But it does find its feet again at the end.
And we had this very active fan base, which was the biggest fan base around, and it was really kind of carrying the torch for He-Man.
Like the toy range itself, the film refocuses on the classic model, and the fans who kept that vision of the character alive. He-Man was very much of his time, and even then only just.
When we first heard the name, it was so macho and so male chauvinistic. I said, no, you can never, that will never work.
And while I do think there's an interesting story here for non-fans, where it works best as a documentary is in selling that moment and taking you back to a time when we all had the power. Thanks for watching. What did you think of The Power of Grayskull? Are there any non-He-Man fans who've watched it? Share your memories of the toy and cartoon in the comments below.